The Kethar warships dropped out of fold space exactly where their scouts told them to. A quiet corridor, a backwater trade lane, 7 slow freighters crawling through the dark between 2 unremarkable star systems. No military escort, no armed response drones. The convoy's transponder signals were clean and dull. Grain, water recyclers, medical supplies, the kind of cargo that moved between struggling colonies and the people who kept them alive. The Kethar didn't care about the cargo. They cared about the message. Fleet Commander Vreth sat in his command chair and watched the freighters appear on his targeting grid, one by one, like fat seeds waiting to be crushed. The Kethar had been sending messages like this for 60 years. To the Lauren, to the Sudathi Collective, to the pale, shell-dwelling Mavari who had made the mistake of settling too close to Kethar expansion lanes. The messages were always simple. The messages always worked. You are small. We are not. Move, or bleed. All ships confirm targeting lock, said his tactical officer. Vreth waved one long claw. Fire when ready. The freighters didn't run. That was the first unusual thing. In Vreth's experience, freighters always ran. They were slow, so they never got far, but they ran. A biological reflex, prey scattering from shadow. These 7 ships held their course. Slow and steady, almost like they hadn't noticed. The Kethar lance beams hit 4 of them in the first salvo. 3 exploded. 1 tore open along the side and began to vent atmosphere. The remaining 3 finally changed course, but not away. They turned toward the Kethar fleet. Vreth tilted his head. They were unarmed freighters. He checked the grid again. No weapon signatures, no shield harmonics. Just 3 dying ships pointed at his battle group like accusing fingers. Destroy them, he said. They did. The message was sent. The Kethar fold jumped home. Vreth logged the engagement as a routine territorial demonstration and went to sleep. He did not know what he had done. He did not know what those 7 ships were carrying. He did not know that the freighters were flagged to a species the galaxy had mostly ignored for the last 200 years. A species the senior races called the latecomer ones, the ones who had shown up to the galactic community late, loud, and utterly baffling. The ones who were always fighting among themselves and yet somehow kept expanding. The ones who smiled too much and cried in public and wrote songs about their dead and had never, not once, signed a standard territorial concession treaty with anyone. He did not know that one of those freighters was carrying 43 tons of emergency surgical equipment, bound for a colony called Kepler's Reach, where 11,000 humans were waiting on supplies after a fever outbreak had burned through their medical stocks 3 months ago. He did not know that the surgeon on the 4th freighter, the one that tore open and vented atmosphere before it finished exploding, had spent 18 years building a children's hospital on a moon that most of the galaxy didn't have a name for. Her name was Dr. Amara Osei. She was 51 years old. She had 3 grandchildren. She died in vacuum with a medical kit still strapped to her back, because she had been heading toward the cargo hold to secure supplies when the hull opened up around her. Vreth did not know any of this. The galaxy found out in stages. The Galactic Commerce Oversight Bureau received the distress beacon logs 42 hours after the attack. A Lauren clerk processed them, noted the destroyed transponder codes, noted the species flag, filed a report under Kethar Territorial Incidents, non-member species, and sent an automated notification to the nearest human diplomatic office. The notification sat in an inbox for 6 hours. Then a junior human diplomat named Tadashi Mori opened it, read it twice, and went very still at his desk. He was 29. He had been posted to the conclave station for 8 months. He had mostly handled paperwork, trade disputes, transit permits, the occasional noise complaint from species who found human music physically distressing. He was not trained for this. There was no training for this. He pulled up the transponder logs and confirmed them against the human-civilian registry and sat there for another 3 minutes doing nothing. Then he picked up the communication relay and called Earth. It was the middle of the night in Geneva, where the Unified Earth Foreign Council kept its primary offices. He got a night duty officer first, then a deputy secretary. Then, inside 20 minutes, the secretary herself, Yolanda Ferreira, 63 years old, former admiral, the kind of woman who slept 4 hours and called it luxury. She listened to Tadashi's summary without interrupting. 43 dead confirmed? She asked. 43 confirmed, ma'am. 11 still listed as missing, 2 of the freighter's logs cut off before the final crew count could transmit. Kethar claim? None filed. It appears to have been logged on their end as a routine territorial demonstration. Ferreira was quiet for 4 seconds. Tadashi counted. "Get me the Kethar diplomatic channel," she said. "Ma'am, it's important to note, the Kethar don't maintain a standard open diplomatic channel with Earth. We've never formalized. Then get me whoever handles their outgoing communications. Get me the Lauren ambassador. Get me the Conclave General Desk. Get me something that goes toward whoever gave the order to fire on civilian medical transports." Tadashi got her something. It took 6 more hours. The Kethar diplomatic office, when Ferreira finally reached an actual Kethar official, a mid-level bureaucrat named Cheth who sounded profoundly unbothered, acknowledged that, yes, a territorial enforcement action had been carried out in the relevant sector. Yes, vessels had been destroyed. They appeared to have been in a designated Kethar expansion corridor. Was Earth a member of the Conclave Treaty Framework? No. Did Earth have a territorial agreement with the Kethar defining transit rights in that corridor? No. Then, Cheth explained patiently, the incident fell under standard expansion enforcement protocol, and Earth was welcome to file a formal grievance through the Conclave Commerce Bureau, which would be reviewed within the standard 18-month window. Ferreira thanked him. She ended the call. She sat in her office for a moment, looking at nothing. Then she called the president. The conversation between Secretary Ferreira and President Okeke lasted 40 minutes. Parts of it were later declassified. Most of it was not. What the public record showed was this. At 0340 Geneva time, President Okeke convened an emergency session of the Unified Earth Security Council. By 0600, every human military asset within 4 transit jumps of the attack site had been placed on active alert. By 0900, the Earth diplomatic mission at Conclave Station had formally requested an emergency session of the full galactic conclave on the grounds of an unprovoked attack against civilian humanitarian vessels. The Conclave's administrative office replied that the next available emergency session slot was in 11 weeks. Earth's ambassador, a Ghanaian career diplomat named Kweku Asante who had spent 20 years navigating galactic politics with patience and careful language, submitted the request, received the reply, and then sent a second message marked urgent, species security matter, to the conclave presiding chair. The presiding chair was a Lauren elder named Sale, who had held the position for 30 years, and had, in that time, received perhaps a dozen urgent, species security matter requests. All of them had come from older, larger species, with standing fleets, and conclave membership going back centuries. He opened Asante's message mostly out of curiosity. It was 3 sentences. The Kethar have destroyed 7 Earth civilian vessels carrying humanitarian cargo. 43 citizens are confirmed dead. Earth formally requests an emergency session within 72 hours, or will consider this matter unaddressed by the conclave. Sale read it 3 times. The 3rd time, something in his ancient, careful brain noted the specific word. Not requests urgent review, not petitions for arbitration. Not any of the standard diplomatic softening language that the conclave's member species had refined over 800 years of collective governance. We'll consider this matter unaddressed. He forwarded it to his senior staff and told them to clear the schedule. The emergency session happened in 60 hours, not 72. 60. Ambassador Asante stood at the conclave floor, a vast, tiered chamber where species with 17 different atmospheric requirements sat behind individual environmental enclosures, and he did something that no one in that chamber had seen a human diplomat do before. He did not ask for anything. He laid out what had happened, precise, documented. He named Dr. Amara Ose. He named all 43 dead. He named the colony at Kepler's Reach, the 11,000 people who were now 3 months further from their medical supplies. He showed the transponder logs, the beacon data, the Kethar bureaucrat's response calling it a routine territorial enforcement action. Then he stopped. The chamber waited for the ask, the petition, the request for arbitration, compensation, territorial agreement. Asante looked up at the presiding chair. Earth is not here to ask the conclave to handle this, he said. Earth is here to inform the conclave that we are handling it. We are informing you as a courtesy. The chamber went very quiet. Species who communicated through color shifts went pale. Species who communicated through pressure waves generated a collective low-frequency pulse that the translator systems flagged as communal disquiet. The Cathar representative, a senior official named Rath who had been sitting in comfortable certainty that this would resolve the way these things always resolved, went absolutely still. Sayel leaned forward. Ambassador Asante, clarify your government's intent. Asante picked up his materials from the podium. The Cathar attacked a humanitarian convoy. They killed 43 people. They called it routine. He met the presiding chair's eyes. Earth's intent is for that to have consequences. He walked out. Back on Earth, the news had been running for 31 hours. It did not run the way the government had planned. The government had wanted measured releases, careful framing, time to prepare the public for what was coming. What happened instead was that a crew member on one of the surviving freighters, a 23-year-old cargo handler from Auckland named Hemi Walker, who had been on the ship that took the grazing hit and survived because he'd been in the shielded engine compartment, had uploaded his suit camera footage to the public net before anyone told him not to. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage. The first 2 minutes were confusing. Darkness, vibration, a lot of shouting, then the hull breach alarm, then Hemi's voice saying something that the automatic translation systems flagged as non-standard exclamation, probable emotional distress. Then 47 seconds of exterior camera feed that Hemi had somehow patched to his suit display. The freighters burning, the Cathar warships, enormous and angular against the dark. The medical supply containers, bright orange, internationally standardized, marked with the universal symbol for humanitarian cargo, tumbling through space as the ship's hold tore open around them. And in the last 10 seconds, before the exterior feed cut out, a single suited figure in the debris field, spinning, one arm still moving, then not. Nobody knew for certain it was Dr. Osei. The suit was the same model. The size was right. The medical kit on the back was right. Maybe it wasn't her. Nobody believed that. The footage hit 1 billion views in 6 hours. By the end of the day, there was not a single human news network, social feed, or public screen that wasn't running it. Earth's population was 9 billion people, spread across one homeworld, 4 colonies, and 11 independent stations. They were loud, they were complicated, they disagreed about nearly everything. They did not disagree about this. Protests outside the Cathar diplomatic office on Conclave Station, a building that had existed peacefully for decades, were calm, no violence. Humans stood in a line around the building and held up photographs of Dr. Osei. They did not shout. They did not throw things. They stood there for 16 hours, while other species watched and tried to parse what the behavior meant. The Cathar staff inside the building reported it as uninterpretable low-threat activity. The Cathar were bad at reading humans. Most species were. It was, in hindsight, the central problem. 3 days after the attack, a Cathar junior diplomat named Preth filed a formal counterstatement with the Conclave Commerce Bureau. It noted that the destroyed vessels had been in an unregistered transit corridor. It expressed that the Cathar recognized the loss of life and offered a standard condolence acknowledgement. It proposed a joint committee to establish official transit protocols going forward. It was a perfectly reasonable document. The Cathar had resolved dozens of incidents this way. It was what you did. You acknowledged. You offered the committee. The other side filed paperwork. Things moved forward. Ambassador Asante received the document, read it, and placed it in a folder labeled, "For the Record." He did not reply. On Earth, 3 things were happening at the same time. The first was that 11,000 people on Kepler's Reach were being resupplied by an emergency convoy. Military escorted this time. 12 warships. More than the convoy needed. Nobody said why there were 12 warships for a supply run. Everyone understood why. The second was that Secretary Ferreira was on a call with the heads of every human military branch. A conversation that lasted 5 hours and covered logistics, targeting, legal frameworks, and one question that kept coming back no matter how many times they answered it. Are we ready for this? The third thing was smaller, quieter. In a clinic on Kepler's Reach, a doctor named Yusuf Mbeki, who had worked with Amara Osei for 11 years and had been waiting for the supplies she was bringing, sat in an empty medical bay and did not cry. He had already cried. He was done with that part. He was writing a list. What they needed, what they had, what they could do without until the next convoy. He was a practical man. He was a problem-solving man. He had spent his adult life in places where you did not have what you needed and you figured it out anyway. He wrote the list. He filed the supply request. He went back to work. He did not think about the Kethar, not yet. But in 6 months, when the first human warships crossed into Kethar territory, and Fleet Commander Vreth finally understood what he had done, when the weight of it settled on him like a planet, Yusuf Mbeki would be asked in an interview what he thought Earth should do. He would look at the camera. "They already know," he would say. "They're already doing it." He would not sound angry. That was the part that frightened people. He would sound like a man describing the weather. The Kethar had been at war 6 times in their recorded history. They knew what war looked like. They knew its shape, its rhythm, its opening moves. A threatened species filed protests. Protests became negotiations. Negotiations stalled. A border skirmish happened. Both sides mobilized. One side blinked. Territory changed hands. The galaxy's senior diplomatic bodies hosted a signing ceremony, and everyone went home. That was war. That was how it worked. The Kethar were very good at it. They had the largest standing fleet of any non-conclave founding species. They had fought the Mavari for 11 years and won 4 of their 7 core trade systems. They had pushed the Sudathi back across 2 entire sectors with barely a single major engagement, mostly through positioning, through presence, through letting the enemy understand the shape of what was coming and choose to step aside. The Kethar were patient. The Kethar were methodical. The Kethar understood power. They did not understand humans. This was a gap that would cost them enormously. Admiral Priya Chandrasekaran received her orders on a Tuesday. She was 57 years old. She had commanded ships for 31 years, starting as a junior navigation officer on a deep patrol vessel, and working her way up through the kind of career that was built on competence and stubbornness in equal parts. She had fought exactly one war, the Mars Station conflict, 20 years ago, a messy and complicated thing that had lasted 8 months and ended with a treaty that no one on either side entirely liked. She had not expected to fight another one. She read the orders. She read them again. She put them down and looked out the viewport of her office on the EFS. Unbroken, which was sitting in dry dock at Luna Station getting a new reactor housing installed. Around her, through the viewport, she could see 3 other warships in adjacent bays being serviced with a speed that meant someone had told the maintenance crews to drop everything else. She called her flag captain. "Get the crew back aboard," she said. "All leave canceled." "Are we deploying, Admiral?" "We're deploying." "Orders state a destination?" "Orders state a target." Silence on the line for a moment. Then, "Understood, ma'am." She went back to the orders. 3 task forces, 41 ships total. Her battle group was the spearhead. The objective was not the destruction of Kethar military assets, which was what you might expect. The objective was specific. A border installation, a logistics hub, 2 military shipyards. The kind of targets that hurt an empire where it would feel it, not in blood, but in capacity, in reach, in the ability to threaten anyone else for a long time. She read the mission parameters. She noted the rules of engagement. She noted the line at the bottom, which someone had put there deliberately, she thought, because it was not standard military language. Civilian populations are not targets. Medical and humanitarian facilities are not targets. If the Kethar request humanitarian ceasefire terms, acknowledge receipt and relay to command. Do not agree to anything. Do not stop. She folded the orders. She understood. The Conclave's response to Earth's declaration of intent was not what anyone on Earth had expected, partly because Earth's diplomatic office had been careful not to officially call it a declaration of war. The language used was retaliatory action in defense of civilian humanitarian operations, and partly because the Conclave was genuinely uncertain how to categorize what Earth was doing. The Conclave had a war protocol. It had mediation frameworks, ceasefire structures, territorial arbitration bodies. All of these assumed that the parties involved wanted the process to work. Both sides had to want de-escalation, or at least be willing to perform wanting it, for the machinery to function. Earth was not performing anything. This confused the Conclave deeply. Presiding Chair Sale requested a second meeting with Ambassador Asante 9 days after the first one. It was a private session, just the 2 of them, plus translators and a junior aide each. Sale had been a diplomat for 40 years. He had navigated species who communicated through scent. and species who communicated through mathematical proofs, and species who had 6 different grammatical modes for different levels of sincerity. He was not easily wrong-footed. Asante wrong-footed him inside 3 minutes. "I want to understand," Sael said, "what outcome Earth is seeking." "Accountability," Asante said. "Define accountability in this context." The Kethar attacked a civilian medical convoy. People died. Accountability means the Kethar experienced consequences serious enough that doing it again is unthinkable. Sael arranged his fingers in the Lauren gesture for careful consideration. The Kethar have offered a joint protocol committee, which would produce a document in 18 months that they would follow until it became inconvenient. That is the framework through which the conclave manages interspecies disputes. The framework didn't stop them from killing 43 people, Asante said. Earth is not interested in a framework that responds to dead civilians with committee meetings. Sael looked at him for a long moment. "Ambassador, you understand that what you are describing will result in a significant military engagement, casualties, destruction, potentially years of conflict." "Yes. And Earth prefers this to the arbitration process?" Asante met his eyes. The Kethar called killing 43 civilians routine. They filed it as a territorial demonstration. They offered us paperwork. He paused. Earth wants them to understand that some things are not routine, that there is a cost for some decisions that no committee can make disappear. That is not a position we're willing to arbitrate. Sael was quiet for a very long time. Then he said something that his aides would later describe as uncharacteristic, something that did not sound like a presiding chair, something that sounded, they said, almost like a private thought that had escaped by accident. "We have been managing the Kethar for 2 centuries, he said, keeping them bounded, keeping them from pushing too far. We have 19 active protocol agreements with them." He looked at the table. "None of them have worked." He said nothing else. Asante said nothing. The meeting ended. The Kethar home fleet received intelligence about human military movements on the 16th day after the convoy attack. Fleet Commander Vreth was called back from his administrative rotation to attend a war council. He sat in a room with 8 other senior commanders and watched the intelligence summaries and felt something he had not felt in his long career. Not fear, exactly. The Kethar did not have a clean word for what he felt. The closest translation was something like wrong geometry. The sensation of looking at a tactical map and not being able to find the familiar patterns. Everything he knew about how an enemy prepared for conflict was there. Ship movements, supply line activations, fleet assemblies. But the shape of it was strange. "They're not forming a defensive perimeter," said Commander Sarath, the youngest officer in the room, frowning at her display. "They're not protecting their colonies. They're protecting their supply lines," said another. "No. Look at the vector." Sarath traced it with her claw. "They're moving toward us." Silence. "They're a small military power," said Vreth. Their fleet count is what was publicly registered 2 years ago," Sarath said carefully. "These movement patterns suggest they've been building." More silence. Longer this time. "How long?" Vreth asked. Sarath looked at her numbers. "Our analysts believe, based on the observed fleet density, they began accelerating construction approximately 11 years ago." 11 years. Vreth ran the timeline in his head. 11 years ago, a Kethar border patrol had destroyed a human science station that had been inside a disputed boundary zone. There had been protests, a conclave filing. The humans had given a statement expressing that they took the safety of their citizens seriously and expected accountability. The statement had been noted and filed. It had apparently also been a construction order. "They've been preparing for this," Sarath said. It was not a question. "They couldn't have known we would. They didn't know we would hit this convoy. They've been preparing because we hit the science station. Because before that, we pushed through the Ember Corridor transit lane and impounded 3 of their cargo ships for 60 days without formal charges." She pulled up a longer list. "There are 14 incidents over 30 years. Each time, they filed a protest. Each time, we filed it as resolved." Vreth looked at the list. "None of them resolved," she said. "The first engagement happened 22 days after the convoy attack. Admiral Chandrasekharan's task force came out of fold space inside the Kethar outer border zone at 0300 ship time. They did not announce themselves. They had no obligation to. The Kethar had not announced themselves either, when they destroyed 7 freighters in a quiet corridor. The border station was called Keth Vardis. It was a military installation, resupply depot, communications relay, garrison of about 400 Kethar personnel. It had been there for 60 years. It had never been attacked. It had never needed to be defended, because nothing in this part of the galaxy had ever been willing to attack it. Unbroken. And her battle group arrived and opened fire before the garrison finished processing the sensor alerts. The fight lasted 11 minutes. Keth Vardis was not destroyed. Chandrasekharan's orders were precise, and her crews followed them with the focus of people who understood why precision mattered here. The communications relay came down first, the fuel depot next, the military hangar, the defensive emplacements, the things that made the station a threat. The barracks were left standing, the medical block, the civilian administrative section. When the shooting stopped, Chandrasekharan opened a channel. Keth Vardis Garrison. This is Admiral Priya Chandrasekharan of the Earth Federal Ship. Unbroken. Your military infrastructure is destroyed. Your personnel are not targeted. Medical and supply assistance is not offered because it was not asked for, but it is also not denied. If you call for it, we will allow humanitarian traffic through. We are leaving now. We will be back. She closed the channel. Jump, she told her navigation officer. They jumped. The Conclave received the battle report 6 hours later through standard intelligence channels. Sael read it in his office, alone, at a time of night when his staff had gone home. He read the specifics carefully. The targeting list, precise, deliberate, military infrastructure only. The broadcast Chandrasekharan had sent to the garrison, the medical block, left standing. Then he pulled up the Kethar record of what they had done to the human convoy. He looked at both documents side by side for a long time. The Kethar had destroyed everything, the civilians, the humanitarian supplies, the medical equipment, all of it, because it was in a corridor they had decided was theirs, and because the humans had not had the paperwork to prove otherwise. Earth had destroyed exactly what it meant to destroy, sent the Kethar garrison to their barracks alive, and promised to come back. He filed an urgent request for a conclave emergency session, his second in 3 weeks. The administrative office confirmed the slot. He put down the confirmation and sat in the dark for a while. In 60 years as a diplomat, he had built his career on a belief that the machinery of the conclave, slow, sometimes maddening, occasionally laughable, was better than the alternative. The machinery ground everything down, smoothed edges, converted conflicts into paperwork. It wasn't elegant, but it kept the galaxy's larger species from simply eating the smaller ones. He thought about Ambassador Asante's words. None of them worked. He thought about the list Sarath had assembled in the Kethar War Council, though he didn't know about that meeting yet. He thought about 14 incidents in 30 years, and 14 filings that were marked resolved and were not. He thought about the fact that the first time a species had fired back at the Kethar in 60 years, they had done it by leaving the barracks standing. A message, delivered in the same language as Keth Vardis's ruins. We could have killed them, we chose not to. This time, Sael was not a military man. He did not think in military terms. But he knew communications. He knew how things were said, and what was being said between the lines, and what the listener was supposed to understand. He understood what Earth was saying. He thought the Kethar understood it too. He thought they had understood it, for the first time, about 23 days too late. On Kepler's Reach, the emergency medical supplies arrived. The convoy that brought them was 12 warships and 4 freighters. The warships stayed in orbit for 72 hours, long enough to make sure everything was offloaded and the colony was secure. Then they left. Dr. Yusuf Mbeki received the supplies personally on the landing pad. He directed his staff through the offloading. He checked every manifest. He cataloged surgical equipment, medication stocks, diagnostic hardware. He was efficient. He was calm. He was the same man he had been before. In the evening, he went back to the empty medical bay, where he had sat after hearing about Amara Ose, and he stood there for a moment. Then he picked up his chart tablet and went back to work. Outside, in the dark above Kepler's Reach, the stars were ordinary, just light and distance, and the enormous emptiness between things. It had always been big out there. The humans had known that since the first time they looked up. They had decided a long time ago that the size of it was not a reason to be afraid. The Kethar were learning what that meant. The lesson had barely started. The Kethar War Council met for 6 consecutive days after the fall of Keth Vardis. By the end of those 6 days, 3 things had happened. A formal protest had been filed with the conclave, which everyone in the room knew was a gesture and nothing more. A defensive repositioning order had been issued to the outer border fleet, pulling patrols back to more defensible clusters, and Fleet Commander Vreth had requested permission to conduct a retaliatory strike against human territory. The request was denied. This surprised Vreth. He was not used to being told no. He had commanded the border fleet for 9 years. His instinct, the instinct of every Kethar senior commander in that room, was to hit back, hit harder, show the humans what the scale of the mistake was, make the cost of aggression so obvious that they would stop. The War Council's most senior strategic mind, an ancient officer named Kell who had fought the Mavari campaign from start to finish and written 3 books about it, put up one hand and made Vreth stop talking. "Tell me," Kell said, "what we know about human conflict behavior." Vreth summarized what intelligence had compiled. Humans were technically capable, but smaller than the Kethar. They had never fought a species-level war with an alien power. They were emotional, chaotic, driven by individual decisions rather than collective strategic logic. Kell listened. "Tell me," he said, "what we know about what happens to humans when you attack them." Vreth started to speak, stopped. Kell pulled up a record. Not recent intelligence, old history. Conflicts between human nations on their home world, going back centuries before they reached space. Vreth knew, in a general way, that humans had a violent history with each other. The Conclave's historical files noted it as a somewhat embarrassing characteristic of their development, the tendency to fight among themselves. What Kell showed him was different from the summary version. What Kell showed him was what humans did when something attacked them from outside, when the threat was external. They stopped fighting each other. That was the part. That was the thing the intelligence files always noted but never weighted properly. In every instance where human nations had been threatened by an outside force, the internal divisions had collapsed with a speed that no other species in the Conclave's historical record had ever matched. Species that had been killing each other for generations found each other in weeks, mobilized together, fought together with a coherence that made no biological or political sense given the level of their internal conflict. "When we hit the Convoy," Kell said, "we did not threaten a small border faction. We did not threaten a trade company. We killed their doctors." He let that sit for a moment. Their doctors, on a medical run, to a colony full of sick children. Vreth said nothing. "And now they are unified," Kell said. "In a way they have perhaps not been in a century. And they have been building ships for 11 years. He closed the file. "Retaliation will not frighten them. Retaliation will confirm to them that they are right, that we are exactly what they believed us to be, and they will fight harder." "Then what do we do?" Vreth asked. Kell was quiet for a long time, long enough that the room got uncomfortable. Then he said something that no one had expected him to say. "I think," he said carefully, "we may have made a very serious mistake. The galactic news networks, most of them operated by Lauren media companies, with a small number run by Sudathi collective broadcasters, had covered the Convoy attack as a minor story at first. Kethar border enforcement action, human civilian vessels, 43 dead. They ran it for a day and moved on to other things. Then Hemi Walker's footage broke. Then the conclave session happened. Then Keth Vardis burned. Then every senior diplomatic correspondent in the galaxy suddenly realized that they had dramatically underweighted this story, and there was a sprint to correct it that resulted in the most disorganized week of galactic news coverage in living memory. Every network was running something different. Some were focused on the military engagement. Some were trying to explain humans to audiences who had barely thought about humans before. Some were running retrospectives on the Convoy attack that were now getting enormous viewership. The footage of Dr. Osei's suited figure tumbling through debris was running on every platform. A Lauren journalist named Vare, who had been posted to Conclave Station for 12 years and who had interviewed Ambassador Asante twice before, got access to him again 2 days after the Keth Vardis engagement. She had expected a formal statement. She had prepared careful diplomatic questions. Asante sat down across from her, and before she could start, he said, "Ask me what you actually want to ask." She blinked. Excuse me? You want to ask why? Not the political why, the real why. Why a species that had no prior conflict with the Kethar, that had never fought an alien power, is now running military strikes on border installations. He settled back. Ask me. Vare looked at her prepared questions. Put them aside. Why? She said. Because they killed a doctor, he said, and called it routine. But the scale of the response is not about the scale of the attack, Asante said. It's about the word routine. It's about the fact that they looked at 7 unarmed ships carrying medicine and surgical equipment and doctors, and the thing they noticed was that the ships were in their corridor. That was all they noticed. The people inside were background, irrelevant. He paused. You can negotiate with an enemy who sees you. You can make peace with someone who hated you but knew you were there. You cannot share a galaxy with someone who looks at your doctors and sees logistics problems. Vare was quiet. She was good at her job. She let the silence ask the question. The Kethar have done this before, Asante said. Not to humans, to others. And the others filed protests, and the Conclave opened committees, and the Kethar got the territory, and the filing got marked resolved, and everyone moved on. He looked at her steadily. Earth does not intend to allow the filing to be marked resolved. At what cost? She asked. We're finding out, he said. Admiral Chandrasekharan's second strike came 11 days after the first. This one was larger, 2 full battle groups, 23 ships. The target was the Kethar military shipyard at Vortessen, one of 3 major construction facilities the Kethar maintained in the outer sectors. It built destroyers and patrol craft, the kind of ships that had been patrolling the corridor where the convoy was killed. The operation was also the first one that ran into real resistance. The Kethar had repositioned forces after Keth Vardis. They had a defense screen around Vortessen, 6 warships and a missile platform. Not enough, it turned out, because Chandrasekharan's battle group was not the size of force that should have been threatening a shipyard, by conventional analysis. The Kethar defense planners had built their screen for a conventional threat. Chandrasekharan did not fight conventionally. She split her force. The first group drew the defense screen out. The second group folded to a position 30 seconds inside the screen's response time and hit the shipyard from an angle that the missile platform couldn't cover. The fight was chaotic and brutal and lasted 40 minutes, which was longer than Keth Vardis by a factor of 4. 3 human ships took serious damage. The Meridian lost 29 crew to a direct missile hit on the port side. The shipyard's construction bays were destroyed. The Kethar warships were disabled, not sunk. The crews were left on vessels with life support intact, and an open communications channel to Kethar rescue services. Chandrasekharan's broadcast after Vortessen was different from the first one. Kethar Command, this is Admiral Chandrasekharan. We have destroyed the military construction capacity at Vortessen. We have sustained casualties doing it. Our people died here today. Yours did not, because we chose that. I want you to understand the difference between us. You chose to kill our doctors. We chose to let your crews go home. Those are not the same choice. Those are not equivalent positions. I want whoever is listening to think about that. We are leaving now. She paused. We lost 29 people today. They have names. I know their names. The Kethar crew that fired the missile that killed them. I don't want their names. I want them to go home and tell someone what happened here. She closed the channel. In the medical bay of the park, unbroken. Her chief medical officer was working through triage. She passed the broadcast on her way between beds. She had known 4 of the 29. She had treated 2 more who were still in surgery. She did not stop working. Nobody stopped working. The Kethar response to Vortessen was a communique to the Conclave, and through the Conclave, to the Earth Diplomatic Office. It requested negotiations. Asante received it, read it, flagged it to Geneva, and received instructions back inside 2 hours. He sent a reply. The reply was 3 sentences. Earth acknowledges the request for negotiations. Earth's position is that negotiations can begin when the Kethar publicly acknowledge that the convoy attack was an attack on civilian humanitarian vessels, name the order of magnitude of their responsibility, and offer a concrete accounting to the families of the dead. Earth is not interested in negotiations that result in a committee. The Kethar communique back was longer, more formal, and did not include any of those 3 things. Asante filed it under For the record, the Sudathi Collective reached out to Earth's government directly, bypassing the conclave entirely, which was itself unusual enough to generate its own news cycle. The Sudathi ambassador, a quietly dignified being named Oru, requested a private call with Secretary Ferreira. Ferreira took the call. Oru did not offer mediation, did not offer condolences, did not do any of the expected diplomatic things. What Oru did, after a brief exchange of formalities, was ask a question. How long are you prepared for this to go? Ferreira considered the question. As long as necessary. The Cathar will not capitulate quickly. They are not built for it. Their leadership would fall before they agreed to public accountability. The political cost is too high. I understand that. Then you anticipate a long conflict. We anticipate whatever it takes. Oru was quiet. Ferreira did not fill the silence. She had learned from Asante's example. I want to tell you something, Oru said. Something not for the record. All right. The Sudathi Collective lost 3 science vessels to Cathar border enforcement actions 40 years ago. We filed protests. We accepted the committee process. The cases were marked resolved. A pause. They were not resolved. Our scientists died. The Cathar noted our sector as a low-resistance zone and expanded into it twice in the next 15 years. Another pause, shorter. We have watched this happen to others as well. The Mevari, species you do not have names for. Ferreira said nothing. I am calling, Oru said, because I wanted someone to know that we are watching, and because I wanted to say, before this is over, that we understand what you are doing, and we believe that you will hold. Ferreira felt the weight of that. She did not show it on her face, old Admiral's habit. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Oru said. Win. The public memorial for the 43 dead was held on Earth, in Geneva, on a gray November morning. It was attended by 3 heads of state, the full Earth Security Council, and approximately 200,000 people who had come in person. 1 billion more watched. President Okeke spoke. Her speech was not long. It did not make promises or declarations. It was an accounting. 43 names, 43 short descriptions, 43 lives. Dr. Amara Osei, surgeon, grandmother, builder of hospitals on moons nobody named. When the names were done, there was a silence that lasted 2 full minutes. In Geneva, it was gray and cold. On the broadcast, you could see people's breath. Then the crowd was just there, standing together in the gray, not chanting, not waving signs, not performing grief for cameras, just there. The Lauren journalist Vere, covering the memorial from a press platform, filed her piece that evening with a line she had been trying to write for 2 weeks. Humans, it is often observed, are a chaotic and contradictory species. They fight each other constantly. They are loud and emotional and unpredictable. After watching them this week, I have a different observation. They are the only species I know who can stand together in silence and make it feel like a threat. Her editor flagged the last sentence as editorializing. She kept it in. She was right. And in the Cathar War Council, Kel looked at the memorial footage, specifically the 2 minutes of silence, specifically the size of the crowd, specifically the stillness of it, and made a note in his personal file that said only, "We do not know what we are fighting." He was right too. He just didn't know how right. 4 months into the conflict, the Cathar changed tactics. It was not a decision made by Vreth, who had been quietly removed from active command and placed on administrative review. It was not a decision made by the War Council, whose collective thinking had been running in circles since Vortessen. It was made by a civilian politician named Grath, prime arbiter of the Cathar Civic Senate, the body that controlled the purse strings and ultimately signed the mobilization orders. Grath looked at the balance sheet of the first 4 months and understood something that the military had been slow to accept. The Cathar were losing. Not in terms of fleet engagements. The humans hadn't tried to fight pitched fleet battles. They were losing in terms of capacity, in terms of reach. The human strikes were surgical, deliberate, and relentless. Every target was something the Cathar needed to project force. Shipyards, fuel depots, communications relay stations, the network of outer border installations that kept their patrol fleet mobile. Nothing that would trigger a massive conventional response. Everything that made the conventional response harder to mount. It was, Grath recognized with a cold feeling in his chest, an intelligent campaign. A campaign designed by people who had thought about it for a long time. Not years, maybe. But they had thought hard. The targeting choices were not opportunistic. They were sequential. Each strike weakened the infrastructure for the next defensive position. It was like watching someone methodically remove the legs from a table, one at a time. The military wanted to concentrate the remaining fleet and force a decisive battle. Grath looked at that proposal and thought about the human shipbuilding intelligence, which suggested Earth was putting hulls in the water at a rate the Kethar analysts had revised upward 3 times already, each revision more alarming than the last. A decisive battle with a fleet that was smaller than it had been 4 months ago, against an enemy that was larger than it had been 4 months ago, with weaker logistical support. He did not approve the decisive battle. Instead, he called his foreign ministry. The Kethar's second attempt at negotiations came through a neutral intermediary, a Lauren trade house that had dealings with both species and was willing to carry messages. The message was more specific this time. The Kethar were willing to offer a formal acknowledgement that the convoy attack had resulted in civilian deaths. They were willing to establish a compensation fund. They were willing to accept new transit protocols in the disputed corridor. They were not willing to characterize the attack as a deliberate act against civilians, which was a legal distinction that mattered enormously in Kethar domestic law. It was the difference between an enforcement error and a war crime, and no Kethar administration had ever formally accepted the latter. Asante received the proposal and sent it to Geneva with his assessment. Geneva's response came back in 4 hours. They are offering to admit to a mistake. Earth's position is that a mistake is something you do once and stop doing. The Kethar have done this 14 times in 30 years. We are not interested in characterizing it as a mistake. Asante sent the reply, added, in his own formal language, that Earth remained open to genuine negotiations, but that the current offer did not meet the threshold for genuine. The Lauren Trade House relayed this to the Kethar Foreign Ministry. Grath read it. Read it again. He was not a military man. He was a politician, which meant he was, in some ways, a more dangerous thing. A person who understood that the conflict no longer lived entirely in fleet engagements and border installations. It lived in the narrative, in who the galaxy thought was right. He pulled the latest conclave diplomatic intelligence and looked at who was talking to whom. The Sudathi collective had not formally aligned with Earth, but they had been quiet in the conclave, conspicuously quiet in debates where, previously, they had been reliable supporters of Kethar territorial positions. The Mavari had filed a formal review request against 3 of the Kethar's historical border agreements, citing the current conflict as evidence of a pattern. Small species that the Kethar had never bothered to categorize as relevant were filing statements, signing onto joint communiques, clustering together in ways that Grath recognized. They were watching to see if the humans would hold, and if the humans held, they were going to decide that the Kethar were not as inevitable as advertised. He called the foreign ministry back and told them to revise the offer. Admiral Chandrasekaran was 40 days into a continuous deployment when she got word that a formal delegation from the Kethar Foreign Ministry had requested a meeting at Conclave Station. She was in the middle of planning Strike 6. She kept planning it. The meeting was not her job. She was not a diplomat. She was the part of the response that made the diplomacy mean something, the weight behind the words, the reason the Kethar were willing to sit in a room and say things they had refused to say 2 months ago. She understood her role precisely. She did not sentimentalize it, and she did not resent it. But she sat in her ready room that night and thought about 29 names. She had written to all 29 families within 48 hours of Vortessen. It was not required. It was not standard. She had done it because she thought it was right, and because she thought that if she was going to send people into a fight, the minimum she owed them was her own words to the people who loved them. She had received replies from 19 of the 29 families. Some were grief, plain and direct. Some were complicated. Anger at the situation, not at her, but she felt it anyway. A few were something else. A woman in Nairobi whose son had been a damage control tech had written 2 paragraphs that Chandrasekaran had read 6 times. The last line was, "He believed in what you are doing. He talked about it. The week before, he said somebody finally had to. So please don't stop." She read it again now in the quiet of her ready room. Then she went back to Strike 6. The meeting at Conclave Station lasted 3 days. The Kethar delegation was led by a career diplomat named Asha, not a military figure, deliberately chosen. She was careful, formal, and clearly operating under instructions that left her very little flexibility. Ambassador Asante sat across from her with his junior staff and his translator, and did not help her very much. The first day was mostly Asha testing the edges of Earth's position. Where was the flexibility? What could be moved? She had been briefed that human diplomatic positions often had symbolic rigidity over practical concerns, that they would insist on language while accepting substance. She probed for that. She did not find it. Every time she offered a softened version of accountability, an acknowledgement, a regret, an expression of, "It should not have happened this way." Asante brought it back to the same ground. The Kethar attacked civilian humanitarian vessels. They did it as a matter of policy in a territorial corridor. They documented it as routine. Earth's position is that that policy killed 43 people and will be held accountable as a policy, not as an individual error. On the second day, Asha asked, with careful diplomacy, what the practical shape of that accountability looked like in Earth's view. Asante had it written down. He slid it across the table. She read it. Her expression did not change. She was too good for that, but she went very still in a way that Asante had learned to read, in his years of doing this work, as a kind of shock. The document was not long. It had 5 points. A formal declaration by the Kethar Civic Senate acknowledging the convoy attack as an attack on civilian humanitarian vessels. Not an error, not an enforcement action. An attack. A public accounting of all prior Kethar border enforcement actions that had resulted in civilian deaths, going back 30 years, filed with the Conclave's permanent record. Individual compensation for the families of all 43 dead, at a level calculated by Earth's methodology, not the Kethar's. A treaty establishing a permanent demilitarized zone around humanitarian transit corridors, with conclave monitoring and automatic sanctions for violations. And the fifth point, the one that made Asha go still. The officer who had given the order to fire on the convoy was to be identified by name in the Kethar's formal declaration. Not tried, Asante understood the limits of what was achievable, but named, on the record, permanently. Asha looked up from the document. "This is not achievable," she said. "The fifth point, specifically." "The fifth point is not optional," Asante said. "The political cost within Kethar governance." "Is a Kethar problem," Asante said. "Dr. Amara Osei is on the record. Her name is permanent. The person who killed her should be too." Asha was quiet for a long time. "You understand," she said carefully, "that this point may be what prevents any agreement." "I understand," Asante said. "That is Prime Arbiter Grath's decision to make, not mine." She folded the document and put it in her case. While the talks ran, Strike 6 happened. Chandrasekharan's target was a Kethar communications hub, a deep space relay station that coordinated border fleet movements across the outer sectors. Without it, the Kethar fleet's response time to any incursion doubled, maybe tripled. It had been heavily reinforced since Kethvardis. They were ready for her. She was ready for them being ready. The engagement lasted 2 hours. 3 ships damaged, 61 wounded, 11 dead. The station came down. She broadcast after every strike now, every single one. Short, specific, always the same architecture. What was destroyed, what was spared, what the choice between them meant. This one was different. Kethar command. The relay at Station Oreth is destroyed. Your outer fleet is now operating without real-time coordination. We did this while your diplomats sat across a table from ours in the Conclave station. We did not stop. We will not stop until the table produces an outcome. We are fighting and talking at the same time, because you taught us that the fighting is the only reason the talking happens. We are learning from you." She paused. 11 of our people died today. I will write 11 letters tonight. I have written 81 letters in 4 months. I keep count. She closed the channel. Asha received word of Station Oreth's destruction on the morning of the 3rd day of talks. She came to the table, sat down, and told Asante what she had received authorization to offer. 4 of the 5 points: full agreement, the public accounting, the compensation, the humanitarian transit treaty, the formal declaration, not the 5th. Asante listened. He was quiet for a moment. "Give me the room," he said to his staff. They filed out. Asha dismissed her staff as well. Just the 2 of them and the translators. I want to tell you something about the fifth point, Asante said. Not on the record. Not as a negotiating position. Something true. Asha waited. The officer who gave the order. His name is already in our intelligence files. It will be in our history books. Earth knows who he is. He looked at her steadily. The fifth point is not about punishment. It's about acknowledgement. It is about the Cathar Civic Senate, in a formal document, saying the name of the person who decided that killing civilian doctors was a routine territorial action. It is about your government looking at what it built, the culture, the policy, the permission structure that made that decision normal, and saying, publicly, we built this, and this is what it made. Asha said nothing. That is what Earth is asking for, Asante said. Not vengeance, acknowledgement, because without it, in 20 years, there is another Priya Chandrasekaran writing 81 letters, and another convoy of doctors burning in somebody's border corridor. He stopped. Asha looked at the table. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she opened her communications relay and asked to be connected to Prime Arbiter Grath. The conversation lasted 30 minutes. Asante waited in the room. He did not listen. The translation was not running on his side. He watched Asha's face. She was controlled, but he was good at this. He thought she was persuading, not reporting. He thought she was making an argument to Grath that was her own. She closed the connection and looked at Asante. I have authorization, she said, to include the fifth point in a modified form. The name will be in the formal declaration. It will not be highlighted as the singular responsible party. The declaration will make clear that policy, not only one officer, was at fault. Asante considered this. That is acceptable, he said. You'll want your staff back in to confirm the language, she said. Yes, he said. He started to stand, then paused. Why did you argue for it? Asha looked at him for a moment with an expression that his translator did not have a precise reading for. The closest the system offered was recognition of something one did not expect to feel. Because you were right, she said, and I have been doing this work for 30 years, and I know when someone is right. The formal agreement was initialed at Conclave Station, 67 hours later. The final signing ceremony was scheduled for 14 days out, to allow both governments to complete the domestic political process. The Cathar Declaration, when it was finalized, ran to 4 pages. 3 pages of formal language, acknowledgement clauses, treaty provisions, historical accounting. The 4th page was a list. It began with the attack on the convoy. Date, location, vessel designations, cargo designations, personnel count, and at the bottom, in standard Cathar formal script. Acting Border Fleet Commander Vreth, Classification VOR 7. Order issued under Standard Territorial Enforcement Protocol. His name. On the record. Permanent. Asante read the final draft in his office at Conclave Station, alone, at the end of a very long day. He read it carefully, all 4 pages. Then he closed the document and sent a one-line message to Geneva. Bring the families to the signing. The signing ceremony was not a celebration. Asante had been clear about that in the planning sessions. Some of the junior diplomatic staff had expected a state event, formal dress, speeches, the kind of imagery that gets broadcast and becomes symbolic. Asante had said no to all of it. No staging, no performance, a room, a table, the documents, the parties, and the families. 43 families had been invited. 31 of them came to Conclave Station, traveling at Earth's expense from 9 different planets, 4 colonies, and 2 stations. They were seated in the chamber, off to the side, not behind glass, not separated, just there in the room where the thing was being signed. Prime Arbiter Grath had sent a representative. He had not come himself. That was his choice, and Asante had not pushed for it. Ambassador Asha led the Cathar delegation. She arrived in formal dress, and when she walked into the chamber and saw the families seated there, just ordinary people, some old, some young, some in grief clothes and some in whatever they'd found to wear for an interstellar trip, she stopped for a fraction of a second. She had known they would be there. Asante had told her. She had agreed to it. Knowing it and standing in the room with it were different things. She continued to the table. The ceremony was quiet. The documents were read into the formal record by a conclave secretary. Asha signed for the Cathar. Asante signed for Earth. The conclave presiding chair Sael signed as witness. 3 signatures, 4 pages. The whole thing took 20 minutes. When it was done, there was no applause. Asante had asked that there be none, and nobody had disagreed with him, maybe because the room felt like a space where applause would have been wrong in a way nobody could have fully articulated, but everyone understood. A woman in the family section, a daughter, mid-30s, who had come from the outer colony of Vesta Minor, was crying without any sound. The man next to her had his hand on her shoulder. He was not crying, he was just looking at the signed documents on the table, with an expression that was not relief and not satisfaction, and was maybe something that humans have a word for, but other species have had to borrow. Closure. With all the inadequacy that word carries when the wound is real and deep, and what you are closing is not the wound but the door to a room you have to stop living in. Asante watched them from the table. He did not look away. Admiral Chandrasekaran received word of the signing while she was doing maintenance drills with her crew. Her flag captain relayed the message on the command deck. She read it. "Stand down from active strike readiness," she said. "Inform the fleet." "Yes, ma'am. Orders after that?" "We hold position and wait for redeployment orders. Keep the crew busy. Give them the news and give them an hour." An hour was what she could spare. They were still in Kethar, adjacent space. The treaty was signed, but it was new and untested. She did not feel the war was done in a way that allowed for extended rest. But an hour. She went to her ready room, sat. The 81 letters were in a folder on her desk. She had printed them, for some reason she didn't fully understand, and kept the physical copies. She looked at the folder. She did not open it. She just looked at it. Then she got up and went to the ship's small common room, where the off-duty crew was gathered, because she had found in her years of command that when something ended, the right place to be was with the people who had carried it. She poured herself a coffee. She stood with them. Someone said, "Do you think it'll hold, Admiral?" She thought about it honestly. She thought about Kel's assessment in the Kethar War Council, which had been summarized in intelligence reports. She thought about Asha's face when she looked at the families. She thought about the 4th page of the declaration, and the name at the bottom. "I think it has a better chance than most agreements," she said, "because they signed it while they could still feel what they were signing about. Treaties made at a distance, after everything's cooled down, those are the ones that become convenient to forget." She drank her coffee. This one, they signed in a room full of people who lost someone. That's harder to file away. "What happens now?" someone else asked. "We go home," she said. "We work on what's next. We watch." She didn't say that. Watching was not passive. She didn't say that the human fleet wasn't going away, or shrinking, or standing down from its current size. She didn't say that 11 years of accelerated shipbuilding hadn't been about one incident with the Kethar, but about a general understanding that the galaxy was large, and humans were younger in it than most, and it was better to be able to hold the door than to need someone else to hold it for you. She didn't say any of that. They already knew. The conclave held a general session 6 days after the signing. It was not about Earth and the Kethar specifically. It was about the treaty's framework, particularly the humanitarian transit corridor provision and the automatic sanctions mechanism. Presiding Chair Sael had spent the 6 days since the signing doing something that other members of the conclave's senior body found unusual. He had been talking to the small species, the ones who usually sat quietly in the outer tiers of the chamber and voted with whichever bloc seemed safest. He had been asking them questions. The questions were about the Kethar, about things that had happened to them, border incidents, cargo impoundments, expanded territorial claims that had eaten into spaces they thought were theirs. He had been asking carefully, because he was old and careful, and because he understood that the answers would not be simple. They were not simple. He sat with what he heard, the pattern he already knew in outline. The Kethar had been doing this for a long time, and the conclave's framework had been doing something with the complaints that looked like resolution and was not. He had known this, in an abstract way, the way a person sometimes knows something they have decided not to look at directly. He had been not looking at it for a long time. He looked at it now. The general session ran for 8 hours. Most of it was procedural, but the last 2 hours were different. Sael put 3 proposals to the floor. The first was an expansion of the humanitarian transit corridor framework, not just for humans, not just in Kethar-adjacent space, but galaxy-wide, with conclave enforcement authority. The second was a review process for historical territorial incidents involving civilian casualties, going back 50 years. Any species could file. Cases marked resolved would be re-examined against the new standard. The third was structural, a change to the emergency session process. The current protocol allowed a full member species to request an emergency session, with a minimum wait time that the conclave administration could extend for scheduling. The new proposal removed the scheduling extension and set a mandatory 72-hour maximum for any matter involving civilian deaths. He presented the third one last. When he finished reading it into the record, he said, "The conclave received a message, some weeks ago, from Ambassador Asante of Earth, requesting an emergency session. The message said that if the session was not held within 72 hours, Earth would consider the matter unaddressed." He paused. "We met in 60 hours," he said, because something in that message was correct. The urgency was not a human eccentricity. The urgency was right. I want to be honest with this body. We have been slow, in ways that were convenient for us and costly for others. I am not comfortable making that assessment. I am also no longer comfortable not making it. The chamber was quiet. The first vote passed with a large majority. The second passed narrowly, with several member species abstaining, which was a form of yes that didn't require them to officially say yes. The third passed. Sale noted the margins. He noted which species had voted which way. He filed it in his memory next to the list of things he had decided not to look at directly and was now looking at. He thought there was a lot of work still to do. He thought, at 73 years old, that this was not the ending of something, but the beginning of something harder. He thought he did not entirely mind. Vare published her piece the week after the signing. She had been working on it since the day she watched Asante walk out of the first conclave session. It was the longest piece she had written in her career, 12,000 words, in the long-form division of the conclave's main Lauren-operated news network. Her editors cut it to 9,000. She fought for 10. They settled on 9.5. The headline, which she wrote herself and which her editors did not touch, was, "What the Latecomer Ones Said to the Galaxy." She wrote about the Convoy attack. She wrote about Dr. Osei. She wrote about Hemi Walker's footage and the 2 minutes of silence in Geneva and Chandrasekharan's broadcast after Vortessen, where she said she kept count of the letters. She wrote about Asante across the table from Asha and the fifth point and what it meant. She wrote about the small species watching, about the Sudathi ambassador calling Ferreira and saying, "Win." About the Mivari Treaty Challenge, about the species who had sat quietly for decades because the framework that was supposed to protect them had taught them that sitting quietly was the only safe option. She wrote about what changed. The piece ended with something she had written and rewritten 7 times before she got it to sit right. For 200 years, the species the conclave called the Latecomer Ones were treated as a curiosity, loud and young and impractical, too emotional for serious diplomacy, too fractured for genuine power. They fought each other constantly. They cried in public. They wrote songs about their dead and carried photographs of their grandmothers into the halls of the conclave. The senior species were not wrong about any of that. What they were wrong about was the conclusion they drew from it. They saw the emotion and the chaos and the noise, and they read it as weakness. They read it as something that would make these creatures manageable, predictable. They did not consider what happened to a species that felt things that deeply, when something was done to them that was wrong. They did not consider what it meant to carry photographs of your grandmother and then watch her die in the cold, and have the people who did it call it routine. The galaxy expected diplomacy. Earth sent Chandrasekharan instead. And then, this is the part worth remembering, they sent Asante too, both of them, the admiral, writing her 81 letters, the diplomat in the room with the families. I don't think the Kethar understand yet what that combination means. I'm not sure the conclave does either. I'm not sure I do. But I watched the signing, and I watched a woman crying without any sound in a chamber on Conclave Station, while a treaty got sealed that had her mother's name in it, and I thought, the galaxy learned something this year. I hope we are wise enough to remember what it was. On Kepler's Reach, life continued. The fever outbreak was contained by the middle of the month. The medical supplies from the emergency convoy had been enough. Barely, but enough. Dr. Mbeki ran his clinic 7 days a week. which was what he had always done, and which he would continue to do. He had read the news coverage. He had watched the signing ceremony on the broadcast. He had noted all of it. He had not stopped working for any of it. The week after the signing, a journalist came to Kepler's Reach, a young one, human, from Earth, fresh out of school, and a little overwhelmed by the colonies. She wanted to interview Mbeki about Amara Ose, about the convoy, about what he thought of the outcome. He gave her 30 minutes between patients. He talked about Amara, about her work, her hospital, the things she had built on moons that no one named. He talked about the children on Kepler's Reach who were alive because the supplies had eventually arrived. He talked about the ones who hadn't made it in the 3 extra months of waiting, because he thought that was part of the story too, and he was not going to pretend otherwise. The journalist asked him if he thought the treaty was enough. He thought about that for a moment. "No," he said, "but it's a start. What else would you want?" "The same thing I want every day," he said. "For the work to be easier than it is. For the people who need help to not have to wait so long to get it. For the next convoy to arrive on time." He looked at her. What happened to Amara happened because someone decided that what she was carrying didn't matter. The treaty says it mattered. That's not nothing, but the best outcome is not that we got a good treaty. The best outcome is that next time there's a doctor on a ship going somewhere hard, nobody even thinks about stopping them. Do you think that's possible? He stood up. He had a patient waiting. "I think more things are possible now than were possible 6 months ago," he said. "So I'm going to keep working until the rest of them become possible too." He went back to his clinic. Outside, Kepler's Reach was ordinary. Red-orange soil, low scrub vegetation, the kind of sky that looked almost but not quite like home. 11,000 people living their lives, far from anything, making something out of the space they'd been given. The colony's flag was at half-mast. It had been at half-mast since the attack, and nobody had changed it. At some point they would. Not yet. Not while the accounting was still being done. In the sky above the colony, invisible but present, Earth's ships held their position. They would hold it for a while yet. Some things the galaxy had learned, in the months since the convoy burned, would stick. Others would fade. The old habits of the old order were deep and slow to change. The framework that had managed conflict for centuries would not remake itself overnight, because one small species had finally said, "No, not this time, not like this." But something had shifted. Vare was right that it was hard to name. The Kethar felt it, without fully understanding it. The small species watching from the outer tiers felt it. Sale felt it in the chamber when the third proposal passed, when species who had been quiet for decades voted yes. It was not a revolution. It was not a sudden reordering of power. It was something smaller, and maybe more durable than that. It was the knowledge that the framework had a limit, that there was a point at which the committee meetings and the 18-month windows and the filings marked resolved could produce a result that some species would refuse to accept. And that those species would not be unreasonable in refusing, would not be wrong, would have done the accounting and carried the photographs and written the letters, and chosen, specifically, deliberately, to not call it resolved. Because some things are not resolved. Some things are only reckoned with. The convoy burned. 43 people died. A doctor tumbled in the cold with a medical kit on her back, bound for children who needed her. And Earth looked at what had been done, and what the galaxy expected in response, and made a different choice. Not cruelty, not conquest, not the easy thing or the convenient thing, the honest thing, which was, in the end, the only thing the galaxy had not been expecting from them. It would not make that mistake again.